I'm not sure if it's going to be tomorrow or next Wednesday.
Last week I had snow, Denise.
I know, but I just remember the beach background is much more pleasant.
Very inviting. Trying to do something here. That better?
Yes, sir. I'm on. I'm just not doing audio. I'm in transit. I'm in Kermit driving to Odessa.
That better, Denise?
Y'all can hear me, right?
Yes, sir. I like that.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Michael.
Michael.
Tom, can you make yourself into a cat?
Into a what?
Into a cat?
Well, I can't see anybody.
We'd rather be obscene than abhorred.
Hello, folks.
Got it back.
Hello, Deetra.
Hello,
How
Deetra.
you doing, Deetra?
Good, good. How are you guys?
Good, thank you.
Hello, everybody.
How you doing,
Okay.
Mark?
There we are. I got it.
Mark,
Is that
are
too
you
much?
eating? Are you eating a snack?
I'm always eating, Deetra.
Did you bring stuff for all the class?
I'll pass them out. You want some almonds?
Okay, you're on, sir.
Save me some. Save me some.
Is that too much clear, Norma?
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Deetra.
Johnson.
How are ya?
All my glory, I'm home.
Yay!
There you
That's
go.
great.
There you go.
Man, you rehab in a hurry.
Yeah,
I'm not,
you're a quick
I
step.
wasn't home. I assure you my wife was still at the rehab hospital.
How you feeling today?
Tired. A lot of work.
I bet it is.
It's a nasty old beast, I tell you.
Just
Don't-
pace yourself.
You don't want to get it, folks. Let me tell you. It's
I already had it. Me and my wife already had it.
Yeah, but once it goes beyond the virus, you don't know what it's going to do to your body. It's unbelievable. It's,
Yeah,
it's
I've
nasty.
heard many scary stories about that.
36 days in ICU. Wow. Flat on my back.
Okay, do we have it? Do we have everybody?
Yeah.
Is everybody in? Legal in?
I think
Okay.
so.
I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order of the Odessa City Council work session. This Tuesday, March 2nd, year 2021, Texas Independence Day is 3 p.m. Um, Council Member White, would you lead us in the invocation, please, ma'am?
My honor. Thank you. Everyone, please join me. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the moisture that you send in our community. And thank you for each and every person that's joined together to discuss the betterment of our city. Dear Heavenly Father, please continue to bless our families with good health and with peace and comfort. Dear Lord, please guide us as we go through the decision making for our community and help us all to make very wise decisions. I ask these things in your precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. We're going to move on to item 1, Impact Fees 101. Mr. Tom Kerr. Michael, is he on?
Yes, sir.
There you go, sir.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Last year, the City Council, in recognition of the robust growth of the city in the last 10 plus years, which is now extending beyond the limits and capacities of our current infrastructure, along with the ever-aging infrastructure that we have in place, engaged Kimley Horn and Associates Incorporated to conduct an impact fee study for us. A capital improvements advisory committee has been established and has been working diligently with Kimley Horn in developing the study. I think there may be several of them present today. Kimley Horn and Associates is here to provide an introductory and refresher presentation to the council on the impact fees, their potential purpose and scope of the study. I want to reiterate that this is a study to provide findings for council. Any action regarding the implementation of the impact fees will be at the full discretion of the council once there is information on which to act. And so I'll go ahead and introduce Mr. Jeff Whitaker, Mr. John Atkins, and Miss April Escamilla with Kimley Horn and Associates to provide their presentation.
And I'm sorry, Tom, before Jeff starts,
Yes, sir.
Council, it was important that in particular, the new members of the council that came on at the end of last year to understand what an impact fee is. I know I've had conversations with several of you, and this is really meant to give you an overview of what it is, a refresher for the council that was here prior to last election, and just to give you a basis of why we were looking at this and why we were considering this. So I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead, you're on.
Is Jeff here?
Jeff, you might be on mute.
Is April Escamilla's on?
Yes.
You want to go ahead and Mr. Escamilla go?
Someone unmuted me, so that's great. So I guess that's a great way to keep me from talking is I couldn't unmute myself, and I also can't seem to turn my own video on. I'm not sure why. So unfortunately, I guess try it one more time. But I think I can share screen, so let me go ahead and get my presentation up. A little bit of technical difficulty on my end, it looks like. So I'm working on sharing the content.
April, why don't we go off our video to help Jeff's banding it?
You should be able to see my screen at this point. Let me know if you can't. Or...
I can see it, Jeff.
Perfect. Well, one of the things we wanted to paint that Tom introduced pretty well was the growth, the historic growth population that's been occurring over the city of Odessa since 2010. As you can see, we're roughly 100,000 individuals in 2010, and that's grown to roughly 125,000. So you've experienced quite a bit of growth over the last 10 years. And as Tom mentioned at the introduction, is that when you experience growth, infrastructure is needed. And so when we engaged in this project, it was really to understand the infrastructure that was needed with the growth that was occurring. Also during that time frame, In 2016, you developed a comprehensive plan from Envision of Odessa. And then in 2019, you did a lot of important infrastructure master planning throughout the city. You developed a water and wastewater master plan as well as a transportation master plan. So why is this important? Well, it's really important is when you develop an impact fee program, you have very up-to-date master plans and a pretty up-to-date comp plan. So those are two of the variables that we'll talk about today that feeds into the impact fee study. You also appointed an advisory committee, and the advisory committee has been critical to us as we presented information that we're presenting to you today, and we walked them through the process with that advisory committee. You know, city council is an important piece. The actions that will be taken as part of this study will be completed by city council, as well as the general public. The state law requires 2 public hearings as part of this process, and those public hearings will be available to the general public. So these are the 3 stakeholders really as we're working through this process: the advisory committee, known as the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, city council, as well as the general public. At the conclusion will potentially be in the approval of an impact fee study and the potential adoption of impact fees if the council desires to. The fee will be a discussion as part of the study. We'll discuss the fee. One of our jobs is we will develop the technical merits of the study. Council will decide what that rate of the fee is up to the maximum fee that we establish, and we'll describe that in a little bit. So a little bit of the outline of this presentation. We'll go through the role of city council through the projects, the impact fee process, a little bit of municipal finance history. Really, that is, why did impact fees start becoming more apparent? The statute was written in 1987, and why more cities recently have adopted impact fees. What are potentially some of the benefits of impact fees? Give you a revenue example, and lastly, end with schedule. So the role of city council. During the adoption process, and this is the same role that, this is really the process that the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee has as well. During the adoption process, relying on city council and the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee to help review the land use assumptions in the CIC comments. We're also asking them to review the impact fee capital improvements plan, and then lastly, what the actual impact fee recommendation will be. So these are really the 3 buckets that we are working through on this project. And when you review the impact fees, as mentioned, that fee could be anywhere from setting a rate of 0 to setting a rate of what the study calculation comes out to. That's kind of the policy decision that will happen as part of the study, the impact fee study. Between updates, if you were to adopt the impact fee study, is that every 6 months, the CIC will review the impact fee study, review the program, and consider any revisions based on the CIC for land use, impact fee capital improvements program, and the impact fee, and bring that report back to council. So every 6 months, there's a check-in portion between the updates if the project was to move forward. So a little bit about the process we've been going through. We kind of broke this process into a 5-step process to make it somewhat easy to understand. The first step is the planning step. That is the land use assumptions in the capital improvement plan. We call it the impact fee capital improvement plan because it may be slightly different than your traditional capital improvement plan because it's based on needs, not financial commitments. Then there's an analysis step. That's where we calculate the impact fee. Then there's a policy step, which is establishing the impact fee. And then there's an adoption, which that's when you actually create your ordinance and create the fees that you were looking at too. Just to let you know where we are right now in the process is we're about halfway through that. We've been working with the advisory committee, and as you'll see on the March 9th agenda, there'll be some recommendations about the planning step, really the land use assumptions and impact fee capital improvements program from the CIC. They'll be providing those written comments, I think at the March 9th meeting, the next meeting. CIC has met one time to discuss the analysis step. We're going to meet again to really go over the analysis step, but we're really working with that advisory committee about halfway through the process. A lot of the technical work has been done, but now we're diving into some of those details with the advisory committee and giving you a briefing on that. Just to give you a brief overview of where the land use for the CIC has been, and they'll provide you more details of those comments and recommendations at the next meeting. But we worked with them through the growth rates. We utilized the master plans for infrastructure and the comp plan to determine growth areas, and really the growth rates changed between 0.5% to 4%, depending where you were in the city, with a really average growth rate of 1.3% across the city. CIC believe that these growth rates are reasonable, and they've asked us to move forward with the growth rates outlined. We also looked at service areas, and what service areas are important is these are the areas of the city that you can actually assess impact fees and charge impact fees. So there's a different service area for water, wastewater, and roadway. So really the water service area is where where the city of Odessa is servicing water. So the attached boundaries, which you see in blue, is the water service area. And you can see for reference, you can see the city limits and you can see the future 5-mile ETJ. Wastewater, similar to the water, slightly different. If you flip between the two, you can see the difference, but this is where you're serving wastewater. Same concept. The green is the wastewater service area. The outlined shade shows the city limits, and we show the ETJ on these maps for references. Roadway is a little different. State law has a requirement on the roadway infrastructure side that we can only charge roadway impact fees inside the corporate limits, inside your city limit boundaries, and they can't be greater than a certain size. So we work through the roadway service areas based on those qualifications of size, boundaries, corporate limits, and we developed 3 service areas for the city of Odessa. These are the 3 service areas that we are preliminarily proposing for Odessa. We also worked through a capital improvement plan, and we'll go into more details. There will be a public hearing, et cetera, on these, but we're trying to get you a little bit up to speed of where the capital improvement advisory committee's been. What I'm showing in front of you is the water and wastewater capital improvement plan. These are based largely on those wastewater and water master plans that you saw that were adopted in 2019. So that's one of the important things is once we come off the heels of a master plan, we have a pretty good solid list of projects that can roll into an impact fee program. So these are the maps and associated projects that are associated with the water and wastewater capital improvement plan. And similar for roadway, we have a capital improvement plan for each of the roadway projects. Roadway, each service area, as I mentioned, there's 3 service areas in the city of Odessa, so each service area has their own capital improvement plan. Each service area is treated as like its own city because money collected inside that service area has to be spent on projects within that service area. So the money stays within the service area. And roadways, we have new projects, that means a road's not on the ground. We have widening projects, that means the road's to be widened. We have intersection projects. All these projects are about capacity. One of the things that the projects require us to do for state law is we can only look at capacity projects. That means we can't do maintenance projects. So overlays, filling potholes, a water line breaks, you repair the water line. We can only include increasing the capacity of the system, both on water, wastewater, and roadway. So all these projects are increasing the capacity that's associated with new growth. And feel free, if you have questions as we go along, to interrupt and ask questions. So that brief history gets you kind of where the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee has seen the assumptions. Those are the assumptions on the service areas, the land use assumptions, and the capital improvement plan. A little bit about just municipal finance history. From the 1950s to the 70s, really there was a lot of funding potentially provided for transportation and various other programs from the federal level. Well, basically, these outline some of the programs that are available in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. What you saw in the 80s is that federal domestic spending really decreased as a percentage of the total federal spending dollars. So the amount of money that was available for transportation projects to the city and any type of projects, but largely we're talking about transportation, decreased. What we saw was an increase in the local and state responsibility share. So the state and the local shares really increased. And so there was various ways of trying to replace that revenue source. So when the federal spending went down a little bit, how do we replace that revenue source? So really in the 80s is where you saw a lot of cities looking to figure out how to fund infrastructure. And the statute in Texas for impact fees was written in 87. So that's because they were trying to find a legal and a fair way for growth to pay for growth. Also about the same time you started to experience high growth rates in cities. So decreased spending coupled by high growth rate really was starting to look at areas for increased revenue options. Really, the burden of the revenue raising responsibilities fell on local governments. As I mentioned before, 1987 was the year that the state of Texas enabled impact fees. And you saw a lot of cities in the early 80s and even the early part of the program really jump on impact fees for water and wastewater. Roadway came a little bit later, and you've seen a lot of cities as the funding continued to decrease for roadways. You've seen a lot of more cities more recently enact roadway enabling legislations. One of the things that's important, some of the answers to the questions you may ask me is why do we choose to do it this way? Chapter 395 of the Texas Local Government Code defines how we calculate impact fees. It's one of the longest impact fee enabling legislations in the US. It's very prescriptive in how they tell us to calculate it. So a lot of the reasons and the why we do things, the impact fees, and the way we do public hearings and the way we present information with the advisory committee, et cetera, is it's outlined in Chapter 395. It's kind of our playbook. So some of the reasons we choose to do things is because that's what the legislation tells us to do. A lot of it, the questions I may refer back to Chapter 395. So if you hear me refer back to, that's kind of our playbook for impact fees. I put the definition of impact fees, and I like to outline the definition. Really, it's an assessment that the city proposes new development, and that's what's important. I want to highlight this is just for new development. So like if it's an existing home will not pay an impact fee. These are for the new homes that are being built or for the new developments, the new commercial developments that are being built. But really the purpose of those funds are to recoup the costs of capital improvements or facility expansions attributable to the new growth. The impacts on the infrastructure system are real, and our job was to calculate what those impacts are, so that someone will have to pay the actual rate at some point in time, whether it's through a water bill or a tax fee, depending on what you are. Some of those infrastructure costs were going to be done at some point in time. What an impact fee does is really to figure out a lump sum charge so that growth pays for those impacts up front. That's really the definition that you're seeing right here, is how does growth pay for growth up front. It's a one-time fee for future development. So as I digest that long definition, one-time fee for future development, and it's a mechanism to recover infrastructure costs required to serve future growth. So if someone wants to ask you what impact fees are, this is kind of my Cliff Notes version, 1 or 2 lines of what impact fees are. So why would a city try to do impact fees? What are some of the benefits or some of the items of why a city would choose to do impact fees? It's one of your toolbox for municipal funding for infrastructure. There are multiple revenue sources: the general fund, bonds, water and sewer rates, drainage utility, potentially a transportation utility, our street maintenance fee, as some folks call it, our private sector participation. These are the toolboxes you have. So the more tools you have in your toolbox, the better you can fill that pie of infrastructure costs, trying to allocate that pie and build as many potential projects that the city would need as possible. When you think about that, the impact fees is really just that extra tool for the infrastructure necessitated to serve new growth. It's just one of the tools in your toolbox that you would have to allow to fund new infrastructure in the city, to allow for growth to pay for growth. The state of Texas allow for 4 impact fees. You might research on impact fees. I always encourage people to do some research on impact fees. I would encourage you to research cities in Texas. If you research cities outside of Texas, they all have different state legislations and different impact fee statutes, different rules and regulations. In Texas, the only impact fees that are available are roadway, water, wastewater, and drainage. We're looking at roadway, water, and wastewater. Not very many cities have drainage because most codes require drainage to retain on site and to satisfy their own drainage requirements. So if you think about development, if you're retaining on site and you're not impacting the system, you wouldn't really have an impact to your system outside that. The cities that have drainage impact fees are ones that may have a regional detention center that everyone's draining to, and they're paying towards that regional detention pond. But for Odessa, we're looking at roadway, water, and wastewater for the study currently allowed. As I mentioned, if you Google other states, you might see school, police, fire, parks, and library impact fees. Those are not in the statute of Chapter 395 for Texas at this point in time. Chapter 395 really is to collect that flexible fee for infrastructure. And what I think the word flexible is really important. Is why is it important? Is when you collect from a developer, you have the ability to spend it within that service area. So if you collect $1 from infrastructure, the city has the ability to spend that money within that service area on the highest priority project for the city at that time. There are many cases where in a current process, you might have the developer build the road or something right in front of their development, or you might have to collect money for potential improvement on that specific project. This allows the city to collect a flexible fee for the highest priority infrastructure they have in the city within that service area. And it's a balanced funding combination that recognizes the benefit of growth. And what that means is if you're growing rapidly, you're going to collect more impact fees because growth's paying for growth. If you're not growing, you won't be collecting those impact fees and you won't necessarily need that infrastructure associated with it. So the funding source is really growth dependent, and it really shows that when growth occurs, funds are collected to pay for that growth. So what would the benefit potentially to a developer be, or to the people doing this? It's equitable. In reality, the fee is known, and the fee for a certain unit is calculated the same way. It would be the same as if your neighbor was paying. And some of the developments is if you pick the right piece of land, your development cost for infrastructure might be cheaper than something else. On this, it's trying to equalize that burden, that each development would pay the same fee and go towards the roadway infrastructure. It's also predictable. At the end of the day, if Odessa chooses to adopt an impact fee, a fee schedule can be made available online, and someone can log in online and calculate the fee and understand what is going to be built and how's it going to be. So the program ideally is going to be predictable. And when you work in the private sector, one of the most important things is to understand what the dollars are going to be so they can calculate their performance on a specific project. It ensures accountability. State law is very particular in how the study is adopted, how the community is informed, how council is informed, and how the capital improvements advisory committees perform. And then we also have to spend the money in a certain amount of time. If you don't spend the money in the amount of time, you have to refund the money. I've never had a city have a problem issuing refunds on impact fees because the demands and needs are great out there, and the capital improvement plan will show that. But if we don't spend the money on those projects, it also requires the money to be spent on projects, and that's what's really important with the state statute, is it has to be spent on those projects that are listed on that list. It can't be spent on, whatever the highest priority that I often use is you can't use your transportation impact fees to go fund a fire truck. You have to use it for a roadway on that list. And there's an advisory committee, the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee is in charge for monitoring that program to make sure that that we present they present how the money's being collected and how's it being spent. So there's some accountability built in. It's proportional. And it is the amount of fee directly relates to the demand generated by the development. An easy example is if you pull a larger water meter, you would pay more for the larger water meter than the smaller water meter. Or in a traffic situation, if you're building a single family house, you would pay less than, say, a restaurant because a restaurant generates more traffic. So it's directly proportional to the demand of the development. And the calculation would show that. One of the things I mentioned earlier is what can you pay with impact fees and what can you not pay with impact fees? And what can be paid, the way I think about this is anything that adds capacity to your system. Updating a roadway, like widening a roadway or building a new roadway, updating your water and wastewater lines, but it's whole project costs. So you can pay for survey and engineering fees, land acquisition costs, and debt service of the impact fee CIP. As most of you know, when you deliver large capital projects, most of the time you're not funding it through the general fund. You might be issuing debt. You can pay that debt service off of it. And you can also fund planning studies, as long as those planning studies are going to be towards infrastructure needs. Sometimes you need to understand the right-of-way taken. You might do an alignment study for a roadway, or you need to understand the route that a water or wastewater line needs to go. You can pay for those type of studies. But it's anything that really is associated with large capital capacity improvement projects. What you can't use the money on, you can't use it if it's not included in the list that we showed you before. Those projects would not be eligible. The projects have to be identified on the list. You can't use it for repair, operations, or maintenance. So you can't, if you're painting your elevated storage tank, you can't paint the elevated storage tank with this money. You can build a new elevated storage tank, or you can expand a wastewater treatment plant, but you can't use maintenance dollars. You can't use it to upgrade it to observe existing development. So we do a lot of calculations on our end, and when we explain the analysis is, you have an overall cost of the CIP. A portion of your cost of the CIP is for existing citizens and existing taxpayers. We cannot utilize the existing deficiencies or existing needs on impact fees. And one thing that we can't do, the state law of Texas does not allow, is you cannot pay city staff time with the impact fee fund. The entire impact fee fund has to go towards projects. You can't use the administrator cost of the program. So the program's time would have to be funded through a different source. The ideal behind that is that the money collected goes straight to the projects that are listed, and that the development's dollars used for growth are being paid for growth-related projects. Just a revenue example, we wanted to, the advisory committee, I believe, asked for this, but we wanted to look at a previous two-year impact fee revenue example. So what we did is we looked at the city of Odessa's permits over the last 2 years and figured if you had adopted we'll just say Midlands rates. We just took the nearest city that had impact fees and said, okay, this is not their maximum impact fee rates. This is the adopted rates that the council chose to adopt. If you had adopted Midlands rates, this would be the revenue that was projected that would have been collected in 2018 and 2019 if you had adopted your nearby cities rates. And we also wouldn't include what a 10-year, the cost exposure of a 10-year impact fee capital improvement would be. So over a 10-year period, what would the needs necessarily be for those programs? So that's roughly $35 million that the city has calculated for those needs. So roughly over the, in 2018-19, you collect roughly $4.5 million over those 2 years for roadway, water, and wastewater if you were collecting at Midlands needs. So as I mentioned, that's just a piece of the pie. In order to look, and that's the annualized. That's not the 10-year. That I may have said that. That's the annualized rate. So if you look at what you would have collected on a yearly basis, a little over 10% of that overall funding need would have been by impact fees. There's still another 90% that would have to come out another source, but at Midlands rate, over your needs, over the 10-year annualized needs, a little over 10%. So this is just an illustrated version. We'll have these versions updated to be Odessa specific as we work through this with the advisory committee to show you kind of what different neighboring cities and what different elements are doing. So, but this is just a simplistic example we wanted to give you to have some discussion. A little bit of our schedule, as Tom mentioned at the beginning, in 2019, the city started considering impact fees at the very end. In spring 2020, we were really contracted to perform the study. Really at the fall, we finished a lot of the technical work, and we've been working through that technical work with the advisory committee and getting their comments and feedback and trying to work through that. We're still working on that. As I mentioned, we're about halfway through the process on that, and we're just going through the process. So that's a quick summary of that. For obvious reasons, some of the meetings, us being in the virtual environment, having COVID hit, kind of impacted the schedule a little bit of how we're moving forward and how we've been considering this and making sure that we're able to accommodate everyone's schedule. But this is more a detailed version of the schedule. These are all tentative dates. Today is the Impact Fee 101 that we presented on March 9th. There is a council meeting to set the public hearing for the land use assumptions and capital improvements plan. What that means is by state law, remember I mentioned Chapter 395 has rules. We actually have to set the public hearing before we have the public hearing. So all this meeting, there's no action in this meeting. I believe that the advisory committee may be presenting and giving their recommendations on just the land use assumptions and capital improvement plan. On April 6th, we have put an optional work session for council on the land use assumptions and impact fee capital improvement plan. If we want to dive a little deeper before we have the public hearing, that just gave us a time to have another work session to dive deeper on that topic. April 13th is the council public hearing on land use assumptions and capital improvements plan. So that's the public hearing where we would look at the land use assumptions and impact fee capital improvement plan that I went through briefly at the beginning of this presentation. Dive a little deeper, have a public hearing on that, and decide whether or not we're good with that. That's what Chapter 395 of the local government covers, is they make it a two-step process. We will, if you will, adopt the land use assumptions and capital improvements plans, and then if those change, we'll edit the report to change afterwards. So if those are adopted on April 13th, on April 27th, we would set the public meeting to discuss the impact fee study itself, with June 1st being the council work session. I didn't make this one optional. I feel that on the impact fee study for the maximal accessible fees, that's a really good work session where we actually are talking about, what do the fees look like? What should they relate to? So we put that work session, we programmed that work section in. And then on June 8th would actually be the public hearing on the work session. And then June 22nd, all these are tentative dates, would be when we would actually consider adopting an ordinance. So really this is probably the, if you will, this, according to state law with the time frames in place, this is the fastest that schedule could happen. Obviously the schedule could be changed differently depending on the input of this meeting, but this is the required schedule from Chapter 395 based on us setting the meeting on March 9th. So really the earliest we can actually adopt any impact fees in Odessa would be June 22nd if we follow the requirements outlined in state law. So they want to make it a very public process, and this just shows you kind of the opportunities that are on there. All these dates are tentative, but I just wanted to kind of outline that schedule for you. I went through a lot of information with you. John Atkins, who you heard from earlier, and myself are both here to answer any technical questions, any scheduling questions. And I believe we have representatives also from city staff and our Capital Improvements Advisory Committee that may be able to answer any questions you have of them as well.
Jeff, I have a question. This is
Okay,
Tom
Jeff.
Sprouls. How did
Go
we
ahead, Tom.
establish the boundaries of the 3 districts?
Sure. I'm going to slide back to that slide where we have the 3 district boundaries as I'm talking, just so you can see what I'm referring to. It's the great thing about so state law of Chapter 395 of the local government code requires a certain size that the areas could be. So that was one of our big things, is we knew we had to have 3-ish service areas in the in the city of Odessa. So I think we developed 2 or 3 options, and we worked with staff on what those options look to be related based on growth patterns in the area, et cetera. And then we worked with the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee in discussing what options would work most appropriately. So as much as an art as it is a science, there's legal requirements, and then really what we look at is where travel patterns may change. The service area boundary between 1, 2, and 3 was based on a major facility where we thought travel patterns would change, and we thought that the travel patterns changed roughly between service area 1 and 2 here. So we were trying to use where travel patterns might have changed a little bit, but also outlining what state law said. So I don't know if that clarifies your question, Tom.
Jeff, what was the distance criteria that the state has?
Yeah, the criteria is they can't be longer than 6 miles. It's a little vague, but basically our criteria is it can't be longer than 6 miles. So we try to look to see if an average trip is longer than 6 miles in these areas. And there's about 3 different checks we do, and based on our checks, these boundaries meet the state law's requirements. But we're open to hearing and understanding if these boundaries should be reconsidered. Great question, though. Any other questions? One thing I'll point out is, just as you start thinking about service area boundaries, is I mentioned each of these service areas can act kind of its own, like when we actually, if we were to adopt impact fees, they would all have their own fund accounts, so they kind of act like their own little cities, if you will. Money spent in each service areas retain each service area, but also the rates that you establish might vary in each of these service areas too. So just, you can kind of treat each one of these independently. Now, on water and wastewater, you have 1 service area, so that's a little different. But on roadway, you have 3. So you can kind of think, when you start thinking about each of these areas, they each could have, if you will, their own policy or rate associated with them.
Jeff, this is Councilman Thompson. So, do most cities charge impact fees for to these develop? I guess my question is, are developers used to paying these fees?
It depends on, so in the state of Texas, it depends on where you're located. They're becoming more and more common. West Texas is probably one of the least common areas that have impact fees, but your city, Midland, has them. Lubbock now has them. I think statewide, about 50% of the cities have water and wastewater, and about a third of the cities have roadway. So it's relatively common. When you're in the Metroplex, there's a lot in the central Texas. I think, as I mentioned, there's many ways for potentially growth to pay for growth. Other cities have different tools too. Like San Antonio uses a different tool than impact fees that accomplishes a very similar thing. So from impact fees in particular, I'd say about half the cities in the state have water and wastewater, about a third have roadway. And then, but all cities have some form, typically a fashion. Odessa has this today to try to help them get growth to pay for growth. They may be a different mechanism, but there's items in your ordinance that help for private development to participate in infrastructure.
One of the considerations we should take into effect is, I mean, really our competition is Midland. And as I understand it, they're kind of outpacing us right now as far as growth is concerned. Would you agree?
Yeah, Midland's definitely one of the comparison cities we're using, and they do have impact fees.
The same developers are over there that are over here, correct?
I'd have to default to city staff on that because I don't know exactly the developers who are developing in both cities. So, or maybe other folks that are more familiar with that answer.
I just see D.R. Horton's have 20 homes.
I think D.R. Horton and Beatonbow both probably participate in both cities to some degree. The primary developers say that landowners to begin with and that type of thing. I don't know that there's a whole lot of crossing in those regards, but I'm also kind of speaking. I don't really know who Midland's all their primary developers are. But.
Yeah.
But one anecdotal comment is sometimes we hear is from a national perspective, a lot of national developers are used to paying impact fees. And as someone who does performance for cities, is oftentimes I have to verify and double check to make sure they don't have impact fees because they're used to paying them. So just usually when I check the box that they don't have an impact fee, they always make me double check.
Right.
Is there anyone from the capital improvements committee? Anybody on?
Yeah, yes, I am. John Landgraf here.
How you doing, John? You want to weigh in on? I mean, you've been on this since the initial. You know, we've talked before. Is there anything else you'd like to add on to what Jeff has spoken about?
Well, I can tell you, Jeff covered that very well. We're going through that process as he has talked about. We are looking at, and Cindy is on today, and she brought to us, we asked, how have we funded projects in the past? You know, I've been doing this for 40 years here and wanted just to have an understanding of all the pieces and the different ways that we can fund capital projects. And this is just another tool in the toolbox. Certificates of obligation have been a big factor in that. The water and sewer fund, there are multiple aspects, and this is just another piece that's being considered. We've certainly not made up our mind. We're not to that point in that process. I'm one of the things that our committee is going to ask is that we have, before we come to y'all with any type of recommendation on the impact fees themselves, we want to open this up for discussion with the stakeholders, the developers and the builders from Odessa, the ones that are impacted the most, and get their feedback. And as Tom Kerr said just a minute ago, some of the people here, such as Beatonbow and D.R. Horton, that work in other communities are paying impact fees in other places. Then there are people like Silverleaf Home and John Burnett and Larry Lee and some of those, and Larry Bell, some of those developer builder types who have not been exposed to those as much. So I think we were going to have a mix of ideas from some of my conversations, and that's why we felt like it'll be important to hear their perspective before we bring any direct recommendations to the council.
That's a good idea, John. Jeff, let me ask this question real quick of you. How will the impact fees impact those older districts, especially primarily in 5, 3, and 1, where we have affordable housing? Will make obviously will make the cost go up. But can you give us a little detail of how the impact will be?
We don't have any. We're not ready to even discuss, you know, whether that's $10 or $10,000 yet. And I'm just obviously throwing out numbers. If you start doing that, and Midland's fees, and I can let Jeff talk specifically, but I know on a multifamily apartment project that we're doing in Midland right now, I think they paid about $3,000 per door per apartment as their impact fee that went directly to the city. And we're having to the city's having to upgrade some water and sewer lines just, because of this apartment project. So it's directly related to this development. It's in an older part of Midland also, which goes to what you're saying. There are some fill-in projects in some of the other districts that could be affected by the fees.
Yeah. Well, by adding a new development, there's an increase to the system, and that's where you can put the impact fees. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, like Jeff was saying, you can't use the city can't use those impact fees to, replace a water line. Now they can upgrade a water or sewer line if the development's requiring it. They can widen the street. Dawn Avenue, just as a perfect example, is a 2-lane road right now. It's on that impact fee list. It's under design to be widened to 4 lanes because of all that development that's happening out there in the Hurt Ranch area and the Beaten Bow stuff north of 87th Street. So that gives you a perfect example of, an impact fee. So any development in that area that's going to use Dawn Avenue as their access or their transportation in that area would be paying something to help make that a 4-lane street instead of the 2-lane street that it is today. That's just one quick example. Jeff can give you. We've got 3 big studies that outline all of that. They're very detailed.
Hey, John.
Yes.
This is Steve. Hey,
Hi, Steve.
we could also, because I know there's a lot of pressure on that wastewater line going south from the north up there, those 3 areas. So
yes.
we'd be able to use that to make those improvements. So.
Yes. The line P and the line Q, the big sewer lines that we're talking about are in that, are identified in the plan, and certainly as anything that would be served by those lines, impact fees could be collected and could go towards that. And I think something that Jeff said and John Atkins said that's real important is those impact fees can be used as for debt service that you did. It might take us 20 years to collect enough impact fees before we could start building that line P, for example, because it's such a big cost. But you could go ahead and build it now, and then as development occurs, pay down the debt with those impact fees.
That way, take it off the taxpayer that way.
Right. Exactly. I see John nodding his head. You might want to elaborate on that some, John.
Yes, John, you're saying that the correct answer. I mean, I'm just agreeing with you by nodding.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the only thing I want to add to John, you had a great comment, is if you're in an older area, one thing I want to make clear for anyone that's watching is if you're in an existing like business and you're doing a finish out or rebuilding, that's not if the building's already there, you're not necessarily charging an impact fee. Now, if you're upgrading your water meter from a 1-inch meter to a 2-inch meter, you would pay the delta between the two. But existing development won't be charged. I just want to make sure that, so sometimes that benefits older areas because a lot of it's rehab and renovation and of existing buildings.
Yeah, great point. Yes.
But the way the growth's going, John, and it looks like to me it's putting a lot of pressure on the whole system, the way the city keeps on that direction.
I didn't hear you, Steve. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my voice kind of gone. I was just saying that the way the city's growing right now, it just looks like to me that's a pretty important thing to know about, because I know it's putting a lot of pressure. There's a lot of houses going up out that direction.
right? And the studies, take a look at those master plans and understand that, and that's what we're going to be bringing you a recommendation to accept those. They really outline, Kimley Horn did a very good job of defining the growth areas and what's needed to keep those growth areas moving forward. And that stuff's going to get built. I mean, or else Odessa's not going to grow. So it's going to get built. I think what we're really all looking for is the best available mechanisms, and I say that in the plural term, the best available mechanisms to fund that, to fund the growth of the city of Odessa. How do we best do that? And y'all, the city council, have to make those decisions. We're just trying to give you some more options or additional tools in your tool bag to fund the continued growth of the city.
How much risk do we take of losing these developments to Midland if we do impact fees? You think we run much risk?
Steve, I need to be real careful about this because I think that is that is y'all's decision as the council. I think what we're going to do is tell you what it's going to cost, what those impact fees could be as a maximum number. And then y'all will have to decide, and that's a political answer, not a technical one. But I can tell you, Midland did not enact all that they could have. They only adopted a portion. The same thing with Lubbock. Abilene and San Angelo do not have impact fees. So the two closest cities are Lubbock and Midland, and they just adopted a certain number. Whether Odessa's higher than that or lower than that or equal to that, I think is really the council's decision. But that's going to turn into an economic development type answer.
Right. Okay.
Long-winded, I don't know.
I just all this growth just shouldn't be put on our taxpayers that we can keep from it. And these developers need to be paying their fair share, in my opinion. But
I understand. I think that's what's there for consideration.
Yeah.
Council, is there any more questions or comments for Jeff or anybody else, or for John? Jeff, we appreciate you being on here. Thank you for answering questions. I'm sure we got your number. We can get a hold of you if we need to ask more questions. John, I appreciate being on and all the work that your committee's doing. Definitely be calling you on more questions that we do have as they arise, and we're gonna have questions, and members of the council will be contacted after this work session. They'll be asking a lot of questions. I appreciate your time, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mayor?
Okay. Yes, Michael, go ahead.
Mayor, we're going to skip number 2. Miss Ortega was not feeling well today. So we can bring that back at a later date.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. So we'll move on to item number 3. Consider economic development agreement between ODC and the Ellen Noel Art Museum. Michael, who do we have on here? Do we have Natasha? Do we have Wesley Burnett? He'll be talking on behalf of this.
I know we have Ms. Brooks, and I believe Wesley is on as well.
I'm on.
Yes, sir.
And Wesley's going to speak on this.
Okay. Mr. Burnett, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. It's my pleasure to present this project. I know it's a work session and it's information gathering, so I'll just kind of give you the high points of the application. We do have representatives from the ODC board on the WebEx today, as well as representatives from the Ellen Noel Art Museum, if there's any questions. But hopefully you've been able to take a look at the application that came to the Odessa Chamber and was presented to the Compliance Committee. This went before compliance 2 separate times due to the complexity of the application and the project. Obviously, it's one that needed some extra attention. The Odessa American reported that the request was 1.5. That is what the application was, but compliance committee did recommend up to the ODC 600,000. So I just want to let you know that much scrutiny went into the application and into the process, and what we felt, or what the committee felt, was an appropriate recommendation was $600,000. This is a project that fits in the NAICS codes 519120 and also under museums and libraries, but also 501 and 504 of the applicable law that talks about the job creation. So their plan is their expansion and updating the museum complex, which fits to the quality of life questions and job retention and recruitment efforts in economic development. Their goal is to retain 8 jobs and add 16 jobs with 380,000 plus or minus payroll additional. Their full on capital campaign will be 12 million to be raised for this effort. They felt like this portion from ODC was appropriate for this particular project. As I've said many times, when things come to the Chamber for Economic Development, first question we ask is can ODC do it, yes or no? If that becomes an affirmative, then we move through that process. The Compliance Committee takes much time and effort and care to analyze each aspect of every project and make sure it does fit in with what is allowable. And then they make a recommendation to the ODC board for their considerations and ultimately their approval or rejection. That's where this one came. That's where this one went. There's a lot of information in this application, and a lot of supplemental information that can be passed along if the council would like to see that, and probably you do. There's some summaries from Dr. Perryman on the value of these types of projects to recruitment and economic development efforts. All of that to say, your goal here is today, I believe, to have questions answered, concerns addressed if there are any. We do have Mr. Boutin and Mr. Tim Edgman from the ODC on here as well to talk about this. I run them through the process and recommend up, and this is where we get to on every project. Just wanted to let you know the process we went through as far as the details that went into being reviewed. We appreciate the opportunity to present it to you. Obviously, we're here to answer your questions, and if you go forward to obviously ask for an approval of ODC's vote from their last meeting. So with that, I think in the interest of time, I'll turn this back to you, Mayor, or to anyone else that might have a question. We'd be happy to see if we can address those or see where we need to go from here.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. We do have some members of the community that want to speak on this before I open it up to council for questioning. Ms. Grimaldo, do we have someone that, or we have individuals that wanted to speak on this item, on item 3?
Yes, sir. We have Chris Crow who wishes to speak on this item.
Can we make the address before open up to questioning and comments by the council? It'll be, who's first? Crow?
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. Yes, this is Chris Crow. I live at 2388 Bainbridge Drive here in Odessa, and just wanted to speak to this a little bit. As you know, I have a big heart for the Odessa Development Corporation and funding that can be used to develop the city of Odessa, and more specifically into exactly what ODC was originally tasked with, which is just that, economic development. I think ODC dollars should be used for investment in economic development projects to create jobs, which I see here where the goal here is to retain 8 jobs, create 16 new jobs with a $380,000 payroll. But originally ODC was created to diversify Odessa out of the oil and gas economy, as well as to create capital investment, which would go back to the tax base to fund future projects. While I've reviewed the project, and I do agree under that NAICS code 519120 for museums, libraries, this does fit. But just because you have a project that is fundable, does that mean that you need to fund it with economic dollars to do so? I think the Illinois Art Museum is just a fantastic organization. I've supported the Art Museum myself personally over the years financially, as well as it's contributed a lot to the growth in my daughter's lives. However, I think there are a lot of entities that are better suited to fund this project than the Odessa Development Corporation. Matter of fact, most museums and libraries are independently funded through large corporations, such as a lot of the oil companies we have here that, you know, have their heavy trucks that tear up our roads and stuff. In a lot of ways, this is an opportunity for them to give back. But in the past, I think ODC dollars have been shifted to fund a lot of nonprofit organizations that don't necessarily qualify for development dollars. While on paper this one does, is this really a project that Odessa Development Corporation needs to be funding with these dollars, or should it be picked up by an endowment, by a philanthropic organization, or something like that? One of the other fears is that if you do fund this, how are you going to handle some of the requests from some of the other museums that are going to come forward immediately? You know, the Odessa Meteor Creator Museum, you've got the Presidential Archives, you've got the Parker House Museum. You know, are we going to, you know, fund hundreds of thousands of dollars into these type of venues as well? You know, we can all sit here and make arguments all day about how great the Illinois Art Museum is, the benefit it does to the city of Odessa, but is this the appropriate mechanism to fund a remodel of that museum? I will tell you that had I been on ODC at this point in time when this came up, I would have been like Mr. Boutin and voted against this project. So thank you very much for your time, and I encourage council to really look. I've talked to probably 30 to 40 different people on this issue in the city of Odessa that have all pretty much felt the same way. We love the Illinois Art Museum, it's great, but let's find some other funding for this remodel.
Thank you, Mr. Crow. Next person that wanted to be able to speak on this was Mr. David Boutin. David, are you on?
Yes, I'm on to answer any questions, if there are any questions for me.
Hey, David, this is Denise Swanner. David or Wes, either guys can answer this. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
So originally y'all said there was they filled out an original application. Did it not meet the criteria the first time, and so they refilled it out a second time?
No, it was the same application both times. The first time we met was basically the initial meeting. A lot of times there are questions to be answered as far as some definitions or some clarifications. There was a lot going on during this initial application. It was the beginning of right in the middle of the pandemic, and it was a new way to meet with virtual meetings and that sort of thing. So we were accommodating a lot of different things going on at that particular time. But it was more for a clarification. There was not a reapplication or two separate applications. It was the same one. It was just clarification on some numbers and some different questions and answers to those.
Okay, thank you.
Wesley,
You bet. Yes, ma'am.
This is Deetra. Would you you don't have to go through the whole thing again, but just roughly, what was the approximate cost of their project?
Yeah, their cost of their project, in Austin and Sheila from the library or from the museum are here, but it's a $12 million roughly. I'm sure it's either plus or minus a little bit on that, but I believe 12 million is the number on their total project.
Okay, and you said this potentially is going to add how many new jobs?
Their application says they'll add 16 and retain 8.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And of course, as y'all probably know, just to clarify, it's $600,000 is what ODC did approve, and that would be spread out over 5 years.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any more questions or comments for Mr. Burnett, Ed Edgman, or any of the representatives of the museum or the Illinois?
Yeah, this is Mark Martin here. Would this be I guess a good example of using hotel motel tax funds to help fund this? Since it would promote tourism and possibly put heads in beds and
I don't know. Are you addressing the question to me, Mr. Motley?
I guess you, Wesley. Yeah.
You know, we take applications for the economic development, but we also are housed with Discover Odessa, and they receive hotel motel funds. But that's a city specifically a city question. Probably the staff might be able to answer that better as far as how those money, the council ultimately decides that directly, how they split those dollars up. I'm sure it would qualify, but I could not, I'm not an expert on that particular item.
Mr. Mata, I think the answer to that is quite possibly. I would sit down with the city attorney just to make sure it met the qualifications, but quite possibly.
Thank you.
Well, and kind of just to add a little bit on that, and I may be speaking out of turn, but the cost, the 600, 600,000, we generally, for hotel motel to pay that much money is going to take substantially away from our other, areas. And so, that's where I'm not saying that it couldn't. I just would be surprised if hotel motel could support that kind of a request.
Good. That's a good point, Deidre.
If I can make a comment, Mayor, this is Tim Hedgeman.
Yes, sir.
We went through this project thoroughly. We vetted it through the legal and also the compliance. And the one thing that hasn't been mentioned that really made a difference to me is the fact that I don't know if it's known or not, but there's only 4 elementary schools that has art classes, and the museum provides it for all the other elementary schools, if I understand correctly. So it's even broader than just retaining those jobs and everything else. It's going to help us keep that museum open, help our kids, the young kids on the arts and everything. And after our lunch with Ray Perryman yesterday, he stressed how important that is, that you've got to have the arts, or the bigger companies and stuff that you're going to be trying to bring in here won't come. That's a part of life that's very important. I just want to make that was when I heard about that on the education side of it. That's another situation where we can where that money, the $600,000 is going, is helping a lot of people in this community. And Austin, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, but it is just that we are doing that with Ector County Independent School District, and is serving on the ODC board before. That's why we qualified for a 4A. We would have never bought this project forced to the Development Corporation at all if we'd not met the parameters to start off with. And basically, we do have to have culture in our community. And you're right. One of the first places when a business comes to town that the Economic Development Department takes them to is the Illinois Art Museum, because we're open all the time. We serve the community, and we've got to have culture in the community. And by going with ODC, what ultimately we're trying to do here is say that Odessa has basically some skin in the game. Okay, we're going to go approach Grow also. But right now we have raised basically about 2.2 million already for the project, and we have been silent on this basically, and was kind of a shock today that it was in the paper, because normally when you have a project, it's usually under a code, but naturally it's been exposed. But anyway, that's the whole reason here, and Tim hit the nail on the head. It's two-phased here. It's not only a museum, but it's serving an educational purpose too.
Well, I think piggybacking on what Austin and Tim said, I think when we look at the ODC, this just shows the diversity of what's available and what can be approved. It meets the guidelines. It might not directly affect oil and gas, but indirectly does, because, as they said, when someone comes in and moves into our city, they want to know what we have to offer. And we can tell them all the oil and gas we want to. We can show them all the oil rigs we want to. But if they're coming in with families, we want places where families can participate. And having gone through a year of families not being able to get out much, not being able to do a lot of things. It is my hope that as we begin to open up, that this is one of the places that families who will be attracted to Odessa will have an opportunity to do things with their families. Art is very important. And then when we, as Tim had said, I was just kind of waiting to see what all was being said, but education wise, it is so important to our kids, and when we can collaborate with our district, that's another big plus. It does meet the guidelines. I think I was in on several meetings where ODC was going over this project. It does definitely meet the guidelines. And we have the Perryman project to go back to. Quality of life means a lot. And it may just simply not be, oil and gas directly, but quality of life says a lot to a community if we want our community to continue to thrive. That's my opinion. And I think, we as a city should be as diverse as the requests that are coming in, and be open-minded enough to know that we have to look at everything, not just how oil and gas will affect us, but this to me is an important project for our kids and for our community. Just the arts are very important. As kids, art takes them places that, many of us may be able to afford to go places and do things, but I can guarantee you that in our community, there are those kids who are not able to afford that. Nobody's paying their way to go anywhere to see anything. And the art museum offers them an opportunity to see things that you and I travel to see. And so it's very important to me.
Thank you, Mara. Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
Oh, I was agreeing with Mara. Part of our job is quality of life in the city of Odessa. It's not all about dollars and cents. We are what we are. We're the center of the whole universe. We are what we are. We can try to diversify all we want. And it's good to try, but it's not always available. But quality of life we can assist with it. And my wife being an artist, that's very close and dear to her heart. And so it's one of those projects that I believe in wholeheartedly.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody else have any more comments or?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
In looking at the details on this, this is $120,000 a year for 5 years, correct? Am I right about that? And so my question would be for Austin or Sheila, but tell me what your time frame is on getting this done. Surely you've laid it out and have some goal as to what you're doing. So how will this money be spent?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, we are hoping now that COVID is on its way out here, that to identify funding for 90% of the project within the next 12 months. And then that was our intent, was to raise at least 80% before we went public. Well, that's kind of out of the bag now, but we do have some large scale funding on the horizon. So the idea will be that we identify in the next year, and then we hope to break ground in 2022, and then where the museum would open again in 2023. Now, like all capital campaigns, we are facilitating the ability for people to pledge over a number of years, and we're allowing for people to divvy up their contributions to up to 5 years. So people can give it immediately, or they can decide to pledge us X amount for up to 5 years. And then we have already identified a way to have bridging funding to basically manage the cash flow while we're actually in the project. So there are others that have already pledged that are already taking that option. And then we, like I said, we do have a couple of large scale funding opportunities in the hopper right now, which they too will probably be pledged over a number of years. So we are not going to wait to the end of the 5 years to collect all the money in to do this. We are going to try to get, shovels and dirt as fast as possible because, cost of inflation and the rising cost of construction. We want to actually move ahead, not just for money, but also, I'll be honest, the museum is literally falling apart. We are, and I'm not exaggerating, we are held together by duct tape. So we're kind of like, there's only one way for us, and that's forward. And so look for us to be shovels and dirt in 2022.
Cool. So can you make an art project out of baling wire and duct tape? Can you make an art project out of baling wire and duct tape?
Sure, maybe we can sell this stuff and get some coin for it. That'd be great. But before, if I could just say one other thing to you all, I do have to apologize. I am new to the process of ODC. It has always been my intent to have all of you to the museum to show you the actual project and walk you through the building so that you can truly get your head around it. But my timeline has been kind of turned over because I didn't realize that, well, first of all, it would be in the paper, and second of all, we would be talking directly to you today. So I apologize for that. But please do look out for an email from me. I would love every person that would like to come to the museum. I will show you the whole presentation and show you the problems that we have on the ground and what we're going to do to invest in Odessa's cultural future for the next 50 years. We're going to be more than just a visual art center. We are going to be a cultural focus for Odessa as we move forward. And I would love the opportunity to share that with all of you.
Thank you.
Sheila, thank you very much. We appreciate what you guys do for our community.
Mayor, if I may, just address as far as the newspaper goes, these projects are coded until they are officially voted on and approved by ODC. At that point, that's a public meeting, and the contracts is actually resolutions in your packet. That's a public thing. So I apologize that there was a surprise element here, but it was not an intent. And the newspaper took the application number rather than what was actually approved by ODC. So there was a little bit of miscommunication on that part, but these are typically in the public once ODC approves the projects. They aren't typically taken to the public at a work session like this one. So I think this is was a good headline for the OA. So that's fine.
Mayor, this is David Boutin. May I make a comment?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
To Tom's question, typically the way that the agreement would be made with any grantee, those funds will be paid in arrears, and the grantee has to demonstrate that they've created the jobs or retained the jobs. So again, I think it's important to understand that as they go forward, that process will have to occur in order for the funds to be spent.
That's on an annual basis?
Yes, sir.
Yes, they're paid in arrears at the end of the year.
Okay. Does anybody have any more questions or comments?
Nope.
No.
All right. Great presentation, guys. A lot of information.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone from the museum attending and giving us the information, also from the ODC. Thank you for taking the time, also, Mr. Crow, from the public and participating. Thank you very much. Lot to consider, a lot to talk about, and we'll just go ahead and does anybody else, before I move on to the next item, have any last comments? Council, very much. Thank you very much on this. Okay, so we're going to wrap that one up. We're going to move on to item 4, consider rejecting bids for replacement of security lights at the Sherwood Center. Mr. Steve Patton, is he on?
Yes, I'm here.
There you go, Steve. Go right
Hey, good
ahead.
afternoon, everybody. This is a house cleaning situation where we do have 2 bids that were submitted for the security lights that we need to install at Sherwood Aquatic Center. And our estimate was $70,000. That's also confirmed by our electrical engineer that also prepared that estimate, engineer's estimate. The two bids are way out of line. 102,840 is from Onyx General Contractors. That's a low bid. A second bid of 117,948 was the second bid. We're staff as well as our consulting engineer is making the recommendation to reject these two bids, and we're going to put this project back out to bid. We have some more electrical contractors that are interested in the project since this was out in a public notice. Any
Very
questions,
good.
anybody?
Any questions, comments for Mr. Penn?
Great, thank you all.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks a lot. That was easy, Steve.
That was easy.
Thanks,
Very
Steve.
easy. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to item number 5. Consider contract extension with Barron Service Parts Company for on-site fleet management supply. Philip, are you on?
Mayor and Council, if I could please have a motion to remove from the table as it was tabled at the last meeting.
Okay, that would be for that'll be item number 5.
I'll make a motion to remove from the table.
I'll second it, Mara.
I have a motion and a second to remove from the table. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by saying nay. Motion passes. Okay, so we're back to item 5 to consider contract extension on Barron Services Parts Company for the on-site fleet management supply. Philip?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for allowing us to present again. I'm going to enlist the help of Randy to assist me in running a PowerPoint that I made. I attempted to answer the outstanding questions that the council and the mayor had. So if we can go to the first slide, please, Randy. So again, starting from the beginning, council, we talked about why we have the need for an outside part counter. One of the things that we've encountered in our fleet department is a large turnover in our part staff. It was difficult for us to keep knowledgeable and trained part staff at our parts counter. We also have a lack of storage for our expanding fleet. Over the last 7 years, we've added about 125 vehicles to our fleet. Whether that's due to police take-home fleet or other positions that are added within the city. So we have a continuing expanding fleet. We also had time issues of getting parts. With having Napa on site, they're able to fulfill most of our orders within 24 hours. And actually, a lot of the parts are on site that we have are common parts. But if there's something special that goes on a trash truck, on a backhoe, a cylinder, something of that nature, we can typically get those in within 24 hours. Again, this contract started in 2012, and we've had options for 3-year renewals. So if the council were to choose to renew this contract for a 3-year period, it would be from this year, 2021 to 2024. Next slide, please, Randy. So the benefits that we're seeing again on our having Napa as an on-site parts counter, Napa owns and manages the inventory. So that's something that's alleviated from our equipment manager from having to take care of along with his staff. We're not having to invest into the inventory until it's actually purchase, so that's a benefit of us not having to maintain and hold that inventory. We also have the ability to just work with one vendor for multiple part purchases. So this takes a burden off both our finance and our purchasing department from having to cut multiple POs and checks to various vendors. Going back to the productivity side of it, we are able to get those parts faster. And with the parts being inventoried, we get those a lot faster. I attached a link to a video on this slide, but I believe Mr. Marrero sent that to the council last week, so I won't play that again. But it was basically an explanation of another city that's had the parts contract and the benefits they're seeing there. Next slide, please, Randy. So what are the costs? I know that was one of the major questions that we had. So we're paying cost of the parts and management fee expenses. And this is an excerpt directly from our contract with Napa, that anything that's a Napa product is billed to us at a 10% gross profit. So it's their cost that they're paying the part plus 10%. The same with non-Napa products are at their price that they're paying for it plus 10%. So I will tell you that we, in most cases, try and acquire Napa parts because they are cheaper. Our operational costs are also billed to the customer at cost. And at the end of the day of our contract, there is a goal of a 10% profit with Barron Parts Services, who is doing business as Napa. Next slide, please, Randy. So I have an invoice. This is January's invoice. And Randy, are you able to zoom into that? I'm having a little tough time seeing it. So this is an invoice that we received in January for our services with Napa. So with that contract, we paid accounting and processing fees. We paid a general office fee. We paid the parts counter personnel. And again, there's 3 personnel. There was a total payroll of $13,842 for that those services that are rendered there. And we looked at the services as far as the personnel that's on site. Again, there's a supervisor, manager that's on site. There's also a parts person that's on site, and then there's also a technician that's there to be able to run parts back and forth. So that includes their payroll there. Then they have various items from computer expenses to delivery to insurance, telephone costs. They have training, utilities. They also pay payroll taxes. So that comes into an expense of $18,741 that they're paying for payroll and other miscellaneous expenses. If you go further down the invoice here, there was a total of, can you zoom in a little bit more, Randy? I'm having a little trouble seeing there. So there was $88,060 worth of sales, and the cost of sales with that, there was also a rebate that was associated that we get there every now and then. There's government rebates that Napa's buying their contract off of. So going back to the previous slide, there is a goal of a 10% profit that they're looking to make as of Napa. So with that 10% profit, they charge us $8,872, and that came out to 10.8%. Of the total sales. So that was $66 more than 10% of what we should have paid. So they gave us a credit of $66. So our total expenses for the month were $18,741 just for management fee expenses, and then they provided a $66 credit. So $18,674 were the total management fee expenses, and for the month we paid $88,060 for parts. And Randy, can you go to the next slide, please? I know there was a question of what other cities are utilizing Napa contracts. We did talk to Barron and Napa. The cities of Garland, Denton, Amarillo, Grand Prairie, San Angelo, Fort Worth, and Farmers Branch are all utilizing Napa contracts. We visited with them through our purchasing department and also through their fleet department. They all had complimentary things to say about Napa, and they were glad that they were using that. Here, Randy, could you zoom in on this one for me as well, please? This is a snippet from Denton's contract structure. It's very similar to ours, or it's actually basically the same as ours. On Napa products, they're paying a 10% gross profit rate, and on the items billed that are non-Napa are 10% as well. And then there is also operational expenses that are paid. And then in that contract, I put here on the right that it's any and all costs and expenses associated with the operation of the on-site store. So that includes the salary, benefits, and any other expenses such as unemployment insurance, personal property insurance, other costs that are associated with operating the on-site counter as well. They also included their accounting fees, general office fees. So it's and it also has the 10% gross profit that's their target to acquire. So it's basically the same contract that we're running through our shop that Denton has. Next slide, please, Randy. The city of Grand Prairie's contract is very similar to ours as well. I will note that on their product cost, they're paying, the city of Grand Prairie is paying no 10% markup on their costs, whether it's a Napa product or a non-Napa product. However, the item that was different compared is they do have the 10% net profit that they're looking to make, but there is also a guaranteed sum of $940,000 that has to be paid annually and as part of this contract. And typically that will equal the 10% of what is being paid as part of the contract. Next slide, please, Randy. This is the city of Amarillo's contract. Very same thing as our contract. 10% gross profit on Napa products. Same with non-Napa products. They have operational expenses. Those operational expenses are the same we're paying. It's the compensation and benefits for employees, inventory, operation, liability insurance, other items such as that. And they also have the 10% net profit that they're collecting as well. Next slide, please. So there was also a question from council of what the historical costs for the contract have been. So I went back to 2017. This is the total that we've seen. So if you see in 2017, it was almost 1.5 million for the purchase of parts. The management fee costs were almost 200,000. So it was a total of 1.6 million in 2017, and then going to 2020, it's up to 1.7 million. So again, council, with approval of this item, this would authorize the city staff to execute a 3-year contract extension with Napa Bearing Parts Services, and it would have a not to exceed amount of 1.8 million for both the parts and the management fee combined. So those two items would be combined there. And if we do exceed that $1.8 million amount, we'll be back in front of council asking for an approval to exceed that $1.8 million mark. And are there any questions, council, that I may help to address?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Council, does any more comments or questions for Philip, Tom, Mark, anyone?
I agree with all this now. I mean, I just think in the future, it'd be nice to get the contract renewal or extensions at least 3 months before. That way we can have more time to look over everything and not have to rush through everything. I mean, this, as far as I know, this is going to have to be backdated to January. So I think that would just be prudent. And I mean, maybe next time too, we can also get some bids from other suppliers. I know there's others out there also too that, I mean, they may have been more expensive, they may have been less, who knows? But just it would have been nice to have some options, I think.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I will ensure that we note that, Mr. Mata, and if council wishes at the next renewal of the contract or the discussion of the contract, and it's the direction of council to rebid the contract, we can definitely do that.
Thank you, Philip. Any more questions or comments?
Philip, I know you've expressed that you enjoy doing business with Barron because they're very responsive when you call or have an issue.
Yes, sir.
Have you had a chance to visit with any other cities? Have they had the same positive responses? Because not everybody else has got Barron, everybody else has Napa.
Sure. Yes, sir. So I did speak with the city of San Angelo myself, and I know our purchasing department has spoke to other cities, Amarillo. We are constantly, and I wouldn't say constantly, we are in quite a bit of contact with San Angelo about fleet issues. We should always share what trucks we're buying or what police vehicles we're buying, and we typically discuss the Napa contract annually, and they've been complimentary of it. So I think something that they've enjoyed. Yes, sir.
Good. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yes, sir.
You know, also, Philip, if I'm not mistaken with this situation and with this vendor has been very satisfactory to the city. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Things have gone very well with Napa. I will tell you, just like as with any other contract, when we first started, there were some bumps in the road, and I think we've worked all of those out. And right now, it's a smooth sailing process, and I think our fleet department is very satisfied with the product that we're receiving now.
I think that really does go a long way, and I can tell that you put in a tremendous amount of work on this presentation, and I appreciate that very much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. Any more questions or comments for Philip? Philip, thank you for your hard work on this.
Yes, sir.
Mayor,
Yeah,
you
go ahead,
will,
Michael.
will see this item for your approval at next week's council meeting.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll move on to item 6. This is also a tabled item. Do I have a motion and a second to remove the consideration contract extension to tire replacement and repair? Do I have a motion and a second to remove this item from being tabled?
I move we remove it.
Mr. Pauls, do I have a second?
Second by Deetra.
Do I have a second by Deetra? All in favor indicated by saying aye.
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 All opposed by nay. Item is removed from table. Now, item 6, to consider contract extension for tire replacement and repair. Philip, you're up again.
Yes, sir. Council, Mr. Mayor, this agenda item is for our contract renewal with Southern Tire Mart. This presentation is very similar to the Napa presentation, so we can go through it slide by slide. Again, the need for the outsourcing of tire service. We've had a large turnover in our staff. The last oil boom, I would say, raided a lot of our staff, and I would say a lot of our experienced senior staff. We also have a growing fleet, and storage has become an issue with our fleet as well. And we also have a very diverse fleet. We have tires coming off of trailers. We have tires coming off of police cars. We have tires coming off of 33,000-pound trash trucks. So it's good to have a vendor that has experience in working with all types of tires. We've also experienced time issues with various vendors. And also when we had the service internally of trying to keep up with the tire repairs that were needed. This was a contract that began in 2017, and we've renewed it annually, and we are asking council to renew it annually again in 2021. So again, the benefits of the on-site tire service. Southern Tire Mart owns and manages the inventory for us. So if we need a tire for a police vehicle, they know it's a pursuit rated tire. If they know it's a trash truck, they know if it's going to be a dual rear wheel in the back, or if it's going to be a steering tire in the front. They have all of our fleet knowledge, and they have the ability to service us whenever we're needed. Going back to what we talked about with Napa, having one vendor to work with for multiple tire purchases, that saves our purchasing and finance department from having to cut multiple checks, multiple POs, multiple purchases. So that is definitely a benefit. With Southern Tire Mart, we do have the ability to get our vehicles on the road faster, and we'll talk about that a little bit more further in the presentation. And initially with this contract, we would take our vehicles to the Southern Tire Mart shop, but as we discussed last week, we were running into the issues of being in line with every other oil field company and group that needs tire serviced, and we had some experience and waiting times, and through this contract we've been able to work on that. Something that this contract has also does is it provides 4 racks of tires that we keep throughout the city beyond the tire repair folks that are there throughout the normal 8 to 5 days. So these racks live at fire, they live at the police department, they live at solid waste and equipment services. So if someone has a flat, there's a police tire on there, there's a fleet tire on there, like a white fleet truck that's there's a trash truck tire, so they can get in and get a tire changed out quick. They stick it on that rack. Southern Tire Mart drives around once a day. They fix all those that are flat, put them back on the rack, and they can be utilized for the next truck that or vehicle that has a flat. Next slide, please, Rain. So again, the costs that are associated with this, of course, the cost of the tire, there's the labor and the operation costs that are associated with the contract. And as we stated last week, the prices for this contract are set in a state contract, which is the state buy board and the TIPS purchasing cooperative. This item here, this slide here shows a snippet of what the costs are for the vehicles. and this comes from our contract. So if you see on item 1, it says the purchase of all tires and tubes for cars, SUVs, trucks, and related vehicles. It says varies based on the state contract price, and I'll go over that in the next slide. Our pricing for off-road tires, our backhoes, tractors, lawnmowers, things like that, have a 37% discount on them. And then the retreading of our, which is mostly our solid waste vehicles, has a 66% discount that we receive through Southern Tire Mart. Next slide, please. This next slide, it has various costs for disposal, the mounting of the tires, road hazard, flat repair, and that's all something that comes directly out of the contract. It says not applicable here, but it's in their pricing list, and we'll go over that in the next couple of slides. Next slide as well, please, Randy. So I've highlighted 2 areas here. This is straight from buy board. The minimum discount we receive on Bridgestone brand tires is 20%, and that can go up to 39% based on the type of tire that we're ordering. And then in the middle of the screen, it's not highlighted. You'll see that they have Continental tires on the contract as well, but typically we don't buy Continental tires. The other item on the very bottom that's highlighted, that's the Firestone tires. Again, the minimum discount is 20%, and the discount can go up to 36% based on the type of tire we're purchasing. This item is directly from our contract. It shows that there is a $12.50 fee for light duty trucks for the mount and dismount of tires. And then it has the cost that goes up to $45 for our heavy duty vehicles. We have our cost for balancing of tires at $12 for light duty vehicles. Of course, we have our flat repair costs, our rotation costs, and then our disposal fee costs as well. Right. And are there any questions about the fees that are associated here?
No, those are minimal. Those are good.
Okay, next slide, please. There was a question from council of what cities have Southern Tire Mart. We were able to locate the city of Georgetown, Lubbock, San Antonio, Laredo, Mesquite, Dallas, and Allen. There were also multiple counties, multiple single fire departments, and other cities in Texas. There were smaller cities that had a contract with Southern Tire Mart. Again, they're on the state buy board contract, so a lot of governmental entities pull off of this agreement. So going with the cost, again, I went back to 2017, and I have a ton of stuff on the slide, so I'll explain that there. So you'll see in 2017, we had a cost of $280,000. We went to $319 in 2018, $325 in 2019, and then we had a significant jump to $661,000 as we discussed at the last go around. I'll explain some of the increase in the costs here. Again, we moved to in 2020 having our own on-site flat repair service, so we were not waiting in line based at the Southern Tire Mart location. So again, our Southern Tire Mart contract now allows for us to have 2 people at our location, at our solid waste yard, and they are again at our solid waste yard. All of our solid waste trucks are there. Our utility vehicles are there. A lot of our public works vehicles, and then our parks vehicles are there as well. So if there's a need for service for tires, they can get that done there. But they can also service any tire of any city fleet vehicle there as well. And then one of the benefits of this contract as well, and we talked about last week, is the solid waste is our biggest user of flat repair and new tires. They're driving in alleys, they're driving in the landfill, they're getting flats constantly. And what this contract also allows is the folks from Southern Tire Mart, when the trucks come in every day from their runs, they go through each truck and they check each tire to make sure that there's no leaks present. And if there's a leak present, they repair it, and that way it's ready to get back on the road the next day. And that saves a ton of time of a truck being down the next morning. Also, within this last year as well, if council will recall, in 2014, we purchased 74 police take-home units as part of a program for officer retention with take-home units. Now that we're in 2021, a lot of those vehicles have needed new tires. And in 2020 alone, we spent $23,500 in new tires that were worn out on police vehicles. So there was a significant increase there. So for 2020, we spent $360,000 total in labor. The $123,000 of that was the on-site labor that was billed to us hourly at the yard at solid waste. And then on the left side here under the table, I know this was a question specifically that Mayor Hoven had of what if we could equate what our lost time was. And I spoke with our solid waste superintendent. He said when we were running to the Southern Tire Mart store and didn't have an on-site person, that we were losing 3 hours of that vehicle sitting. And so that required some other truck to have to work 3 hours of overtime to finish their route. And based off an overtime rate of $28.50 times 3 hours and averaging 10 flats a week, that's $44,460 that was being lost in overtime to equate for tires and waiting in line to get those repaired. For police, there were an average of 3 hours that they were waiting in line for repairs as well, based on an overtime rate of $42.80. Multiplying that times the 3 hours, that's $128.40 times what they were saying were 3 flats per week. That would be $20,030.40. So just those two departments alone were, and this is of course an estimate, we're saving about $64,000 annually in overtime of not having to sit and wait for tires to be repaired, with them being repaired at our location.
Thank you for that stat.
Yes, sir. And then again, council approval of this item and authorize a 1-year contract for the purchase and the service of our tires, including our on-site service. And this contract is a not to exceed of $700,000 annually. And if that contract does approach or exceed that $700,000 annually, we will be back in front of the council asking for more funds to be allocated to this contract. And are there any council questions I may address for council?
Council, do we have any questions or comments for Philip?
Philip, I would like to commend you on putting this together for us. This was a large, $2.5 million that you were asking us to approve with very little information. And I know this took you some time to do it, but I appreciate you putting it together so we can understand it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. I tell you, it was great to get back into the contracts. I came from purchasing, Councilmember Sprawls, and it was good to get back in the contracts and to see the workings of them.
Thanks, Philip.
Thanks, Philip.
Okay, no more questions or comments to Philip. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to item 7, discuss virtual and in-person meetings. City Manager, Mr. Marrero.
Yes, sir, Mayor. Thank you. And thank you, Council, for your time. I wanted to list this item because I was approached by a couple of council members, and their direct question was, will we maintain virtual or will we go to in-person? That's really a question for the council. And so I wanted to put this on the agenda so that council could have a discussion about their sentiments or feelings regarding maintaining our current stance as virtual or at some point in the future transitioning back into in-person. So Mayor, I'll turn it over to you and the council for discussion.
Council, does anybody have any opinions or comments?
My recommendation would be to go to in-person for the city council meetings and stay virtual for the workshops.
I like that idea. Governor lifted everything today. So.
Well, Mr. Thompson, he made his announcement, but it won't be effective until the 10th.
10th of March, right.
Yes, sir.
And I think it's important, if you listen to what the governor said, he lifted it and he opened the businesses. However, he said we got to this place by masking, social distancing, and hand washing. And he would hope that we would continue to do those things. He's lifting the fact that the government is not saying do that, but that personal responsibility takes place. And so if we go back to meeting, it would be my my request that out of respect for everyone, that we would continue to mask in the council meetings.
You want me to agree with you? I don't think I will.
Until further notice. And I think especially what concerns me is just coming back, from spring break, we're going to see a spike. It's going to happen, but I just think out of respect for each other that at least, another couple of months, if we as council members would, because we won't be social distanced in the chamber.
Doesn't the chamber have the plexiglass walls on there now, though, also to help?
Mr. Mata, we did put some dividers in between each council member seats. So to answer your question, yes, there are dividers there today.
Very good. Okay. I would definitely want to go back to in-person meetings. I think they're just more effective also. And I don't know, I miss it.
Yeah, me too.
So Mark, are you thinking all of them workshops and council meetings? I'm not opposed either way. I thought you guys might have a little more difficulty making the 3 PMs.
It doesn't really matter. I mean, I have to, I got to stop what I'm doing and get to a desk anyway for the virtual. So I would do either or. I would prefer in person, even for the work sessions.
I prefer in person.
Okay. Does anybody have any more questions or comments?
Mayor, what's your opinion?
Well, I actually really don't like the work sessions, period, because it's just redundant. But that's my opinion. But I'd meet you halfway on the virtual. Definitely need to get back to in person on city council meetings. And so it's long overdue. I mean, all the other entities are doing it. I think it's up to each member of the council to use their best practice. I think, and I think that everyone will. I think when you see the results of this community and others, I think that everyone has done a very good job in the community in doing so, in wearing the mask, doing the distancing, getting the vaccinations, and taking care of not themselves but others. I think everybody's taking this very serious. I think they still will continue to take it serious. I think it's a question now of whether we rescind the mask is now beyond the city council's hands, for the reason is that not only did the governor rescind the executive order, he's also put in a prohibition that no other municipality or counties can continue with theirs. So I think by default, we must act to go ahead and rescind it, if not, would be a violation of the executive order, and we could wind up in litigation. We continued further. So I would just say I would recommend the council to consider that, to do that ahead of time of March 10th. I know that there definitely needs a continuation of education and emphasis on everyone taking personal responsibility for their health care, and to continue best safe practice. If there has been anything that has come out of this COVID in this last year, is also we've seen flu virtually be eliminated due to the fact that we have distance and we have masked up. So that has been a byproduct, but it goes without. I think we've all experienced, it's all been a long year. I think people are weary, and I think, it's kind of like a V-Day, but also it's very somber, for the reason is that we've all been affected so deeply, and I don't think that's going to escape anyone. So I think that going forward, I think people will do so with caution. And I really want to be able to commend this community for doing such a great work, but also to keep their civility in place. For there are those that are going to wish to continue to mask, and it's their right to do so, and we should not put judgment over that, and we should respect that decision, as we should respect those that also wish to do so, but do that with respect. That the thing is that we've all gone through this very hard ordeal, and that we still need to continue together and work together, and I think that we can do that in this community. But I definitely want to go back to the in-person, and I'd be willing to conceded. If we're going to continue to do the work sessions, do them at 3. Let's do it virtually, but a lot easier because of the early hour, and in person in the city council meetings, and open up City Hall again.
Denise, what did they do for you? What would you like to do?
I think Denise had to step out, Deidre.
Oh, okay.
I think she had to go to a service and needed to make the back end. But I'm sure she
I'd
will.
have to.
Go ahead.
I'd
Go
agree
ahead,
with
Mel.
Deidre to do the virtual the council meetings in person, but the workshops still virtual.
I'm good either way. I can pick her poll.
Same here.
Is Tom still on?
Yeah.
Tom said he's good with them.
I'm in agreement. I like it. You know.
Sounds good.
Okay, so are we going to meet next week in person?
Yes, most likely. Well, you know what? No. Let me say. Well, I think we have some conflicts on scheduling, and I think isn't next week
Spring break.
Spring break. Do we not have members out?
I believe I believe Councilwoman Swanner is going to be out.
Okay. Well, that'd just be one, but yeah, I mean, there was something about that.
I think if we're going to go back, we're going to go back because the next week, I could be out or whatever. And so we've just got to make a decision and decide what we're going to do because variants change.
Understand that. There's some items on the that are being headed into the next meeting that are very pertinent that everyone be there. So let me we'll sit down and we'll discuss it with the city manager. Michael, it looks like there's a consensus to go ahead and do a virtual for the work sessions.
That's what I am gathering, Mayor.
Okay, and then we'll go to
in person
for the city council meetings. And we'll have to go ahead and reach out to Councilwoman Swanner about the live meeting on the 9th. And see if there's a way that she can attend through a hybrid. Because I know she wanted to be there and she was concerned, whether we're going to move towards in person or not. And I told her I did not know. She was preferring a virtual for the 9th and move towards the last meeting of the month because of the conflict date. But it's something you can reach out to her and discuss.
Mayor Hovind, you mentioned something that Governor Abbott said about local ordinances. Are we still going to have to vote for that on the next session to end our ordinance or to rescind it, or how does that work?
Natasha, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Yes.
We spoke about this earlier today. Were you able to find anything?
Yes, there's one that we absolutely have to rescind, and then the other, it basically rescinds itself. But let me look closer at it just to make sure, because I think we'd probably be safer just to go ahead and rescind both.
Okay, so we have, when we're talking about rescind, we're talking about we have a mass ordinance. That is one, and then the other would be. What would be the other?
We have the mask ordinance, and then we have the business ordinance. I mean,
okay,
the business mandate.
Which is the occupancy.
Yes, we have an occupancy, which that one, once we got to a certain percentage, remember, was the governor said, it was rescinded basically. So that one we wouldn't have to go back and rescind. But the business mask mandate would be the one that we need to look into rescinding.
Okay.
And I think that's just due to, well, I don't think, but that's due to language that we put in the original mandate.
Yes, so it'd be a procedural.
Yes.
Okay. Councilman Mata, did that answer your question right there?
Yes, sir, it does. Thank you.
So I think the response is yes and no. So,
Correct.
okay. Good. I mean, does anybody have any more comments or questions?
Move to adjourn. I'm tired.
Well, okay, I understand. Okay, so yeah, so do I have a motion and a second to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, do I have a motion by Councilman White, second by Mr. Sprouls? All in favor indicated by saying aye.
Aye.
All those against indicated by saying nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, sir.
Everybody have a great evening.
Have a good
Thank you
evening.
very much.